Good morning and welcome to today's webinar hosted by Snowflake in partnership with Adverity. Just to give you a heads up on what to expect today, the webinar itself will take between 30 and 45 minutes and we will take questions at the end. You will see a Q&A box on screen, so please add as many questions as you like and we'll attempt to answer as many as we can at the end. A recording will be available for colleagues of yours that may miss today's action, and a link will be sent out to all registrants tomorrow. So hopefully you can share this if you think it has some value. So welcome. Today's topic is the modern marketing data stack. We'll start with some introductions. I'll begin. My name is David Fisher. I'm Industry Principal for Advertising, Media and Entertainment at Snowflake. And I lead our go-to-market strategy and our efforts around advertising, media and entertainment. So I'm involved with customers from ad agencies to media owners to ad tech and martech, and of course advertisers themselves. So I like to think that I've got a pretty comprehensive view of the marketing and advertising ecosystem. And today I'm joined by Mitesh Lakhani. Mitesh, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us about your role at Adverity?
Of course, great, thanks, David. So yes, I work at Adverity. I've been here for around about 3 years. I'm a director of solutions consulting, and that's very much dealing with everyday use cases of prospects of ours and helping them to engage with the platform in the best way possible to kind of achieve their end goals. And my experience prior to Adverity is predominantly in the media agency space. So working with people and use cases and clients of all types and varieties, and helping them to kind of adapt to the right technology stacks has always been a big part of my role, which is why I think being in the solutions consulting team here at Adverity leads me to hopefully help people out in the right way to achieve what they need to with the right tech.
Brilliant. Thanks, Mitesh. So we look forward to hearing more about that during the webinar. So to everyone who's joined today, thank you very much for joining. We'll begin by framing the discussion a little bit and highlighting some areas that we intend to talk about. So given the title of the webinar, I thought the first thing that we should do is to define what we mean by the modern marketing data stack. So for Snowflake, what we mean by that is the data-driven marketing technology stack that brands and marketers use to analyze, optimize, and activate the data that powers amazing customer experience. And so when I think about the elements of marketing that are driven by that, we're thinking about data integration and data ingest, data harmonization, possibly modeling, analytics, of course, identity and data enrichment, business intelligence, data science. Naturally, we're talking about activation of those data segments into media types, and accurate measurement of performance, impacts, and return on investment. And we'll talk about some of those topics today in the conversation. I think from our perspective, ultimately this is a revenue-driving exercise for organizations, and the modern marketing data stack should be your way of knowing, predicting, and serving customers to drive returns. Now, there's been a huge amount of development in this space in the last few years, and we'll definitely get into some of that. But I think that some of the things that are happening are some new governing principles are probably occurring in terms of decision making. Can I build a genuine customer 360? Where will that customer 360 be hosted, and can it be a single source of truth? Can I develop a fully cloud-based infrastructure with the associated benefits of being on the cloud? And ultimately, and we'll get into this today, what is the best MarTech stack approach for my business? And there's been a real emergence of best-in-class point solutions in the space, and I think Mitesh has a strong point of view on that. So we'll get into all of that today. We'll explore some of those considerations and about how to deliver a modern marketing data stack. So let's get into it. Now, one thing I should say is that we will be supporting today's conversation with some statistics, some data points. So here's a first slide about the challenge for marketers and our marketers drowning in data. So Mitesh, over to you. Maybe you could explain Adverity, the role Adverity fulfills in MarTech, how it fits within the wider MarTech stack, and perhaps relate that to some of these statistics on screen.
Of course, thanks, David. So first and foremost, I think before we delve into things around Adverity, I think the lead point has to be that interesting and quite astounding stat where 30% of CMOs say that their teams are only reviewing their marketing data up to once a quarter. it's clear that there's just a bit too much technology out there being utilized maybe suboptimally. And because of that dense kind of forest of technology, it's being shied away from a little bit. And there's been an exponential increase in ad tech, as mentioned. So, 67% of CMOs feel that way, as you can see. So because there's also an increase in the number of data sources that people are using, there's just more data out there. As you can see, the average has gone up and sort of 10 data sources are being used by 99% of CMOs, and 52% of people are using 14 or more. So as I mentioned, there's just a lot more data out there. And what that equates to, and what people should be doing in this sphere, in my opinion, is really looking out for those best-in-class solutions. And David alluded to that a little bit earlier. The one-size-fits-all approach is something that was great to achieve economies of scale, and it's not going to work effectively in a slightly more intelligent marketplace. More meticulous targeting and tailored approaches, I think, are needed to meet the consumer's demands. And that's why I feel like looking for a best-in-class solution to fit your use cases are really, really key. Adverity is shifting into this direction specifically. We're putting a laser focus on being the strongest data platform, integrated data platform of choice. And we want to talk to consumers about this rather than the whole tech journey. We know that we're a piece in a larger puzzle. We want to make sure that we are there to support the right element of that journey or the user's data journey. So as mentioned, we very much want to be the data platform of choice. And again, I think coming back to now what Adverity do, I think if we look at ourselves as we bring in data from over 600 data sources, and the first thing that we do is audit and cleanse that data before shipping it off anywhere else. We want users to have a clean data set before they try to eke out any kind of insight with that data, rather than juggling the two tasks simultaneously. And so we want to ensure that the users can bring in their data sources within our platform from day one. There's no wait times for API builds. It can genuinely be something that people can use from the day that they sign up to us, whilst things like builds occur in the background. And whilst I don't want to jump into too much of the detail around that, I think the key point here is that we can ingest a multitude of data forms to make sure that data analysis can begin right away. We want to make the journey to clean data as quick, easy, and efficient as possible. And so that's the point. I mean, I don't want to plug Adverity too much here, but the point is about having the best-in-class solution. And for us, we feel that integrated data platform is the way to go down. And that's my kind of feelings on that question.
So it's an overwhelming amount of data, isn't it? Which points to the best-in-class being the avenue of choice these days, I think, is your point. Because you need best-in-class point solutions instead of a one-size-fits-all. Can you talk more about Adverity's role in terms of cleansing and harmonizing the data? Because I think it's a really crucial point that's a kind of best-in-class feature that you bring.
Absolutely. So as I mentioned, we want to try and look at and be the best-in-class solution for the user's data journey, and that's really, really important to us. But if we think about Adverity and how we're going to be helping out consumers today, we pride ourselves on being technology agnostic, which is, I think, exactly what's required for a modern data stack. We want to ensure that we remain as flexible as possible, and we're well aware that whether you're a brand or an agency, you're going to be wedded and intertwined with differing technology and different technology stacks. And that's why for us, we must remain flexible. The platform allows for the data to be pushed into most BI solutions, either directly or via a database. And so the end user can really play with their data in a space that they're most comfortable in. And that's really, really important to us. We want to make sure that we are a technology product that isn't a barrier to anyone's data journey. We want to help and augment that in the right way. And so that's the way that I think we can talk about ourselves being in the right space.
And one thing that I think is very close to your heart, Mitesh, and very close to Snowflake's heart as well, is moving from intensive data engineering tasks and into more data intelligence. I think that there's a world in which 80% of the benefit should be intelligence, and it should be 20% engineering at most. And I think that's something that you guys are very keen on as well. And Mitesh, I think these stats are from some work you've looked at in terms of the amount of work that marketers are having to go to deliver analysis of these marketing data sources.
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned, I mean, you can see here 43% of CMOs saying that they spend more time getting their data in one place rather than actually looking at the insights of it. And 77% of marketers are yet to achieve a single unified view. Adverity very much looks to provide that for consumers. We want to make sure that the data wrangling part, the really quite tricky part that is being referred to here, is dealt with upfront and done at the very beginning of the data journey. Traditionally speaking, at least in my experience in the agency world, whilst at Wavemaker before Adverity, there were large data teams wrangling with the data in the final destination in a database before it being shipped off to the various client teams so they could actually work with the data. So it was something wrong with that process. It works, but it's quite tedious and can take a lot of time. And so the point here is that there's not going to be a silver bullet solution that just solves every problem everywhere, but we want to try and give people the time back to solve those bigger problems. I mean, I'll come on to that a little bit more later on, but the point here is that a lot of time is spent in organizing the data at the wrong end of the journey, and we want to make sure that that happens at the very beginning, so that whoever is playing with that data, be it a campaign activation team or be it a data scientist, they're working with clean data. So no matter the task, it's a job that they can actually carry out because they trust in that data, and then that's very much what Adverity looks to give people.
And Mitesh, could you talk potentially about some of the data types that come into Adverity and why they need, how you fetch them, why they need cleansing, and how you develop a data coherence? And we've talked in the past about schema mapping, so I think it's worth the audience understanding the benefits that you bring on this side of the MarTech stack to data ingest, cleansing, and coherence.
Absolutely, that is actually one of the real key features of our product, and what schema mapping means to people that don't quite know what we're talking about here. All of the various marketing data sources or any kind of data source that you might be working with classifies data slightly differently. Even if you look in the Google suite of products, for example, they actually classify costs slightly differently in and amongst their native platforms. And so when I was talking about that data wrangling happening at the end, that's normally what is going on. People are trying to figure out what their data means, how Google AdWords is classifying something versus Facebook or Meta, however you want to kind of take it. And the point is, we carry that out at the very beginning with our schema mapping. We ensure that the data set that we're working with is classified in the same way across every data source that you guys might be working with in your use cases. And when that happens, that is what equates to a largely clean data set. Of course, there's a whole host of other things that we do within the platform to add to, augment, and give more flavor to the data if you want to. But the first job of it is to cleanse it and make sure it's classified correctly. And that's what our schema mapping refers to. It's to make sure that you're comparing apples v apples, and all of your data sources are talking the same language, so to speak. And that's very much step one when you're working with Adverity.
And I think it's fair to say, isn't it, that that's such a skillful task that you fulfill. It really points to the benefits of having a best-in-class solution at each part of the MarTech stack, because it's such a fundamental requirement and capability given the amount and the complexity of data coming in.
Absolutely, I think every kind of use case I come across, and when we're speaking to prospects, the key is to ask the right questions, not rather than point and click and show them what the buttons do. We want to really get into the weeds of what the end goal is for anyone that is using our product. And I hope that other technology companies are following this same approach, because we really need to understand the why behind the use and selection of any technology product. And if we understand that, then we're really going to be able to not only give them the solution today, but be a partner with people going forward, because they know that they can lean upon us as an organization that isn't necessarily just something that you just buy off the shelf. again, I'm conscious that I don't want to plug Adverity too much here, but we have a really great consulting team that sits within our organization that almost acts as our mini agency within the organization, because what media agencies do really, really well is help brands cater to their use cases and figure out the best ways into achieving that. And so our consulting team is designed to help out brands who don't necessarily use agencies so much, and they can then leverage us in that right way. And so very much we want to be a partner for people that we work with. And I'd like to hope and think that that's the way that a lot of technology organizations are going to work, especially from this year onwards, because there is a little bit of uncertainty in the air. We know that this is potentially going to be a bit of a tricky year in terms of selecting the right products with a slightly decreased budget. And I think, I'll come on to this a little bit later on, but they're going to need to lean upon us and by us, I mean all of us within the industry in the right way to give them the recommendations rather than just to sign a contract. And so, I think it's very much about making sure that we are almost behaving as if we are the client themselves in a sense. And that's the way to move forward, I would say.
Yeah, and I think it's a really interesting point in tough times. People want to make decisions, and for those decisions to, the strategic decisions to have some longevity. And I think the way that Snowflake and Adverity can work, in that Snowflake becomes the platform for data workloads, becomes the single source of truth, can host a customer 360 with then best-in-class solutions built around it from organizations such as yourself for specific marketing tasks. I think that feels to me like a MarTech infrastructure that will have legs, right? That single source of truth with a partner ecology around it.
Absolutely, that's what people are looking for. They want that unified data view. I mean, that last stat there really kind of highlights that in a big way. If people don't have that unified view of their marketing, they're going to be running blind. And we've got the cookie deprecation coming; it's on the horizon. That's going to leave a little bit of a gap in the space until there's a new piece of technology out there that covers that. Apple have got their Apple ID. They don't use that yet, but that could become a marketplace. I'm sure Google will have a solution to that to the cookie problem as well. But whilst the market corrects itself, we're going to be in a bit of a 50-50 Mad Men marketing type of world where, the old phrase that Jonathan Wanamaker said, I'm wasting 50% of my marketing budget. I'm not sure which 50% it is. And I think to have that single unified view of marketing is going to be ever more important. And whilst there is that slight uncertainty in the marketplace, it makes it even more important to select best-in-class solutions rather than a one-size-fits-all, because we're going to need to identify and know what our data means more so going forward.
Right. Now we have a question, which I think we should look at now rather than at the end. I think it would make more sense to answer it now, which is, how do you cope when the schema or the data taxonomy isn't followed, or when the data is extremely messy? And I think this must happen a lot when you are dealing with up to 600 data sources.
It's a very good question, and we have a really great feature within the platform actually that caters to exactly this, because campaign naming conventions, taxonomies, they are obviously a real pain. If you've got, whether you're a brand or an agency, you're going to have different teams. You're going to have paid search, you'll have display, you'll have affiliate marketing, you'll have lots of different channels and platforms that you're using, and teams that work very, very differently with the way that they run their campaigns. And so there are going to be variances. We have a brilliant portion of our platform which is labeled smart naming conventions, and within that, it's a brilliant feature where it gives you the option to go ahead and pause the data processing. It collects the data, it tells you where the errors are or gaps are, if there are any, and it gives the option to whether you want to process that data and let that land in its final destination and let it be in the right place, or for the error to go ahead and be fixed by the various client teams before the data is processed. So it's, again, quite a flexible approach depending on how you guys want to work with your data. So there is something that is in place, and it's not as though you need to keep jumping back in and out of the platform to figure out whether those errors have occurred. We have a good notification system that can ping you an email to let you know exactly where the errors are, which campaigns or which channels are affected, and you can go ahead and make those changes before that data is then corrected and processed and sent to the right location. So yeah, it's a very common ask and concern, and we recognized that quite a while ago, and we built this a few years back, and it's a really well utilized portion of the platform because yeah, as you mentioned, it's a real pain to work with data that doesn't quite add up.
Great. And Mitesh, is your customer base agencies and advertisers, or is it primarily advertisers? Or what's the customer base look like?
It's a pretty good balance of both, actually. It used to be, I would say, more heavily weighted in the agency direction, but now we've got a pretty close to 50-50 even split on that front, because you know, and we work with a multitude of organisations that where you've got a brand and an agency involved, and you know that can happen as well. And we're quite open to working in a relationship that is good for both in that sense, because we don't want to be an instead of solution. We want to add to the right kind of and complement the right sort of technology stack. So, you know, if you think about agencies versus brands or advertisers directly, if someone is making a decision around the technology that they want to take up, if you're a brand, you're likely to have a smaller team that is making those decisions. If you're an agency, you're going to have multitude of experts within that space that are going to say, oh, this is the right technology to use. And so rather than picking one or the other, I've always said that it's best to have a combination of both when you're coming to make decisions like that. And so, yeah, we have a wide customer base that ranges across both of those areas, and it's quite common for us to answer questions that can navigate through both elements.
Great. Okay. Well, I think the Adverity role seems pretty clear within a modern marketing data stack. So you're in the ingestion, integration, harmonization world of data. How does a customer get started with Adverity?
So in a multitude of different ways, which is quite nice. We have a portal that people can sign up to, so they can test out the platform in a really small scale if they would like. However, they can also get in touch with our teams and then come via our solutions consulting team as well to have a bit more of a deeper dive into the platform. They might need a bit more assistance with achieving their use case. It might be slightly more technical and complex, and that's why we have a couple of different avenues to get started with Adverity. But the main thing is, and I mentioned it earlier, it's very much a partnership in terms of the way that we want to work with our customer base. And, we don't just want to be a barrier, as I mentioned, in terms of the way that someone uses their technology. We want, what happens to the data after it comes into Adverity. As I mentioned, we can push that to pretty much any BI solution, whether it's directly or via a database. And we want to make sure that being technology agnostic makes it as easy as possible for anyone who's using our solution to go ahead and take advantage of it in the right way and plug it into their data journey rather than it be the all-encompassing data journey.
Great. And one thing that I think we see at Snowflake is that we're often the platform, we are, very often the platform for data, and the customer 360 may well be hosted on Snowflake, but sometimes perhaps we're a little bit distanced from the goals that the customers, that the marketers or the agencies are exploring. So what goals do you commonly see from advertisers and agencies that they're trying to achieve with their MarTech stack and a modern marketing data stack?
So it's a really good question. And I think that the important thing is to think about what use cases look like and how consumers are really wanting to use not just our platform, but their data. I think that's the really key thing here. And beyond data ingestion, the big question is how can one iteratively improve their active campaigns? I think there's currently too much emphasis on post-campaign analysis, and which, don't get me wrong, is very important. There's definitely a place for that in this world. We need that. However, a more agile and nimble approach is required to reduce waste and increase efficiency, in my opinion. So, if we, as I mentioned, in an upcoming cookieless world, we have, an element in Adverity, for example, in a portion of our platform called Reveal, that provides real-time notifications as to whether, CPMs are shooting through the roof, or if ROI has fallen off a cliff. It's, widely accepted that when those things occur in this space, that a day or two at minimum is required to kind of amend any of those errors. What if we could minimize that to a few hours instead, rather than a few days? More money would be saved, and again, it's then going to be utilized in a far more efficient manner. And that's what I think is going to be needed when the market gets used to whatever there will be to replace the cookie. As I mentioned, Apple ID solution, whether Google come up with something, I'm sure they will, to create their own version of a refined walled garden, so to speak. And this is it, those walled gardens are only going to become bigger but more accessible in my view. And of course, they'll come at a price. But whilst the market figures that out, whilst there is that gap of uncertainty that exists in what, as I mentioned, will feel like a more Mad Men style world, what we need to do is leverage the correct ad tech to ensure that we maximize that efficiency. So we might have 20 or 30% less budget, for example. However, if we utilize that remaining sort of 70 or 80% more effectively, rather than having that sort of one size fits all or scattergun approach, our results might well be better actually this year versus last.
Okay, so let's move on and talk about what we've termed next level data proficiency. So I think this would be a good opportunity for myself and yourself to talk about some really good example customer use cases. So Mitesh, have you got a good example of what a customer's doing with you and what they're getting out of it, and perhaps what they're thinking about for the future?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, a really good question. And I dug into our kind of really cool case study library to have a look at how our clients are utilizing the platform and what they're doing with the results of it. It's not just a case of, okay, the data works now. It's a case of what do they do beyond that. And if we look at I've got 4 really cool examples here. So Carter's a US-based leading brand for children's clothing, gifts and accessories. Like they're one of our great case studies. The Philadelphia 76ers, iProspect, a large media agency, Odlo, again, an international retailer. And they all say one thing. Adverity is a tool to save them a copious amount of time. What they do with that time is reinvest it back into the business to solve their larger problems and achieve their set out goals. So things like eking out deeper insight and perspective with cleaner data sets is something that Carter's pointed out to us. Building predictive models for stadium attendance is something that the 76ers looked at. Developing future performance strategies is something that, again, iProspect we're looking at. And again, boosting overall operational efficiency by 60% is something that Odlo labelled out. And again, that's not something that Adverity as a tool directly was able to solve, but we were able to give these organizations the time to go ahead and do that. And I think that's invaluable. Time and resource are the biggest strains that exist in our industry, because there's always someone that is working harder than they have to or should be because they haven't been given the right tools to go ahead and do that. And in these instances here, that they've had the technology and they've given their teams the right amount of time and space to go out and achieve their goals and add further value to the business, which is so important. So for me, the key is making sure that efficiency is the end goal with Adverity. That's again the beginning, but helping to identify what the customer's end goals are is the reason that we've been able to get these great case studies, because we're always interested in the why. And I implore anyone who's listening to this to always focus on that. I'm sure that a lot of you guys are doing that, but just in case you aren't, please jump into that, because that's what's going to be differentiating you from others within the marketplace.
Yeah, and I think I just add to that by saying, I think the biggest development that we see is fairly strategic, really, which is that advertisers are just increasingly concerned with how they utilize their first-party data. They are, very, very interested in how they take their customer records and what they know about their customers and activating that within the media ecosystem. So, Adverity play in one space, but I think, when we think about modern marketing data stack, we need to think also about how, first-party data from advertisers utilized around planning and, involved in data enrichment, and ultimately it's involved in media activation. So I think there's a big strategic development there. Mitesh, what's on your roadmap? What's coming next?
A lot of quite exciting things. In and amongst quite coincidentally and conveniently today, we have a rebrand going on at the moment, which is being communicated as we speak, which is quite nice. But in terms of roadmap technology, I mean, I spoke about an element of that a little bit earlier, where I think it's going to be an area of focus for not only us but the industry as a whole. We spoke about the iterative campaign optimization that happens, and coming away from a post-campaign analysis approach solely. We have a portion of the platform that's labeled Reveal, and that there's a feature in there called Proactive Analytics. It's designed to spot trends within active live running campaigns and point out where things are going well, things are not going so well, and in those areas highlight them, give end users notifications to let them know when things aren't going in the right way. So to give you guys an example of that, there's usually a client team keeping a track on the pacing of a campaign, the conversions of a campaign, the delivery, making sure that that's happening in the right way. If, for example, this client team or person that's checking this is doing that at 3 p.m. on a daily basis to make sure that the campaign's running okay, if something goes wrong at 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening after they may have gone home for the day, in a best case scenario, that error or campaign deficiency is going to be picked up at 9 a.m. the next morning. In a worst case scenario, it will be 3 p.m. the next day when the check takes place. And so we've got a wastage of around about 18 hours or so where campaign efficiencies are lost. And if a notification was able to be sent to that particular user and a campaign could be paused, which most of them can be done through a mobile phone these days, the campaign efficiency and budget waste is completely reduced down to a minimal amount. And as I mentioned earlier, if we could reduce that from 1 to 2 days down to a few hours of deficiency and waste, then we're going to be in a much better position. And that's a part of the product that exists today. But that's an area that I know for sure is being worked on and being developed, because things like that are going to become ever more important, because that data comes from without the use of cookies, and largely the whole industry is based on a cookie approach, and so that's where I can see more developments happening with Adverity in the coming year.
Great, thanks, Mitesh. I thought it was worth pointing out that, and it says it on the slide, Adverity is a powered by Snowflake solution proposition. What does that mean from your perspective, and what are the benefits around that?
Thank you for bringing that back to I think the foundations of how Adverity are run, to be honest, and it comes back to the first part of the conversation of having the best-in-class solutions for what our purpose is within the space. So for Adverity, we want to be the most robust, reliable solution out there, and we need the most robust and reliable solution to be coursing through our product as well. And so that's why we partner with you guys at Snowflake, because, as mentioned, we're pivoting to having a more laser focused approach into having that integrated data platform of choice. And we want to ensure that we have the utmost flexibility, reliability, and technical proficiency within our tool. And Snowflake provides this for us. And so I think this brings me back nicely to, I guess, the final point of this discussion around what a modern marketing data stack actually is. And if the listeners to take one thing away from this conversation, I hope that it's that they don't just stick with the status quo of how they've carried out things historically. I hope that they're ready to kind of double down on the best methodologies where they see their best returns, and turn away from the completely traditional approach. Media planning and buying has, I think, over time become a little bit too repetitive and stagnant, and a bit of innovation, I think, is required in that space. And so with an innovation comes a little risk, of course, but given the marketplace, I can totally understand why there might be a bit of apprehension around this specific topic. But I firmly believe that conviction behind these choices are what's needed, not only just to survive in these times, but thrive in them. And that again highlights the reason that we have a Snowflake underpinning the solution that we provide, because it's important to us to double down on the right technology and make sure that we are providing the absolute best-in-class solution for anyone who wants to use our product. So yeah, that would be, I would say, my final point on the modern marketing data stack. Although I want to throw that back to you as well, David. How would you define that? How would you like to close?
I think for us, it's fundamentally important that organisations think about having a single source of truth. That some of the technical capabilities around having a genuine cloud-based data infrastructure are then employed properly. So having a single source of truth, having an infrastructure which removes copying of data, which allows for data collaboration, which allows for all data workloads, are really important. And fundamentally, I think while we're somewhat agnostic around what that partner ecology looks like, we are seeing an emergence of decision making around whether a best-in-class solution such as yourself is the correct way to go. And I think we see a lot of customers working with best-in-class solutions around ingestion, with machine learning, with activation, with measurement. And then we see other ones working around, and customer data platforms have been, a lot of noise around customer data platforms in the last few years. So, we see customers that are thinking about solutions which cover off a few more of the bases in the MarTech stack. But I think for us, what makes fundamental sense is if that relates to a single source of truth around the data. And we would clearly say that the benefits of that operating on Snowflake make most sense. One thing that I did think was interesting, Mitesh, is what advice would you give in terms, and it relates to a question I've just seen in the Q&A, how do you demonstrate return on investment and the benefits of a platform yourselves very quickly, and perhaps relate that to how should organizations be making decisions around which solutions to put into their MarTech stack?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and I think everyone is becoming more increasingly data-led in this world, and rightly so, because that's how we want to make sure we're making the most informed decisions possible when we're making, especially big tech stack decisions within the industry. And so, yes, we can demonstrate ROI very, very quickly. I mean, we've got a great Forrester study and report, and we can definitely share that after this call, this webinar, where we demonstrate the actual percentage returns that can happen depending on the elements of the platform that you're using and what you're trying to actually achieve. And so we can showcase that. And these numbers, they're not going to be the absolute defining reason why you select technology, but they're going to be the evidence that supports that going down the route of selecting something like an Adverity is going to pay dividends overall. That we have a multitude of case studies. I mentioned 3 or 4 of them earlier, but we have plenty more that are available publicly so that people can check that out and see where the ROI has come for those particular clients as well. So it's something that we can promise for there to be an uptick. But I think it also requires a good level of honesty in terms of what the end goal is. I think, traditionally speaking, a lot of organizations are quite protective, and again, rightly so, of their data. They don't want to give away their competitive edge to other organizations within the industry. But if people approach us with very much the partnership mindset, I think that's the way that we can really leverage their information, the value we can provide as a platform, and then move them through the gears into achieving a far more a realistic and attainable ROI, especially very, very quickly. That's the way that I would say to approach that area.
Great. So I hope what we've done today then is give you a sense of what elements are in a modern marketing data stack. I hope we've covered off why it's often the best decision to choose a best-in-class point solution versus something which might try and cover off multiple elements of the MarTech stack, although there are, of course, good business reasons for doing either often. We'll go to questions in a second. I think we've got 2 or 3 questions. Maybe I'm seeing 3 or 4 questions, so we'll get to those in a second. What would you say, just as a final thought, Mitesh, what are the trends for 2023 in MarTech?
Yeah. So I think, again, that's a really good question. I think the influencer world is growing heavily around us, and I think rather than it just being a fad that's going to go away, it's actually becoming more prominent in the industry that we work in as well. And I think the key there is that if you look at some of the best influencers, innovators work, it's very much by putting everything back into the product and the idea. It's always about reinvesting everything back into what your USP is. And that's, I think, the most important thing. And that's what I've seen, especially in the last sort of 6 months or so. All of the most successful, not only influencers, but organizations that exist in this industry are really, really doubling down on what's worked for them more recently, rather than what's worked for them over the last decade. That's the really important thing. Putting that money back into the product, the people, the foundations of organizations are going to be so important for tech innovation that is not only just happened in the last 6 months, but what's going to happen in the next sort of 6 to 12 months as well. So I would say very much getting that investment back into what that really good idea is, to allow people to really have the space to innovate, and give them the freedom to do so. So many people can be a little bit apprehensive to have an idea sometimes because of the way things are done. And I think if more is done in the area of fueling that and rewarding that in terms of the innovation, and putting that money back into the product again, it will give people the encouragement to go ahead and innovate with a bit more freedom. And that's when the real creativity and the good stuff comes. That's what I would say is the real tech shift that I've seen, and I hope to see a bit more of as well in the coming year.
Right, and I think, Mitesh, you've answered a question there, which is the biggest shifts in tech innovation in the space. And I think, we would add to that. I think that, from our perspective, data clean rooms are a huge development. I think we're seeing in data clean rooms moving from original use cases around data matching into all sorts of other use cases around performance and attribution and measurement. And as first-party data moves through the ecosystem, they're a fundamental requirement of data stacks. The other element that I would suggest is coming from our perspective over the next year is the development of applications within our platform. So increasingly, we see a world where the data never moves. Snowflake's secret sauce is that, the data doesn't have to move. It's a virtual view of different people's data accounts, which means that applications can come to data rather than data moving to applications. And we see a development of identity applications, measurement applications, data enrichment applications. All sorts of applications will increasingly be built on the Snowflake platform, which fulfill requirements that will be related to marketing and advertising. So I think they're big things coming from us. I'd also point to best-in-class point solutions are now increasingly emerging around other elements of the MarTech stack. So activation, I think, is a really interesting space where businesses are emerging that just do activation. They just take the data from Snowflake and they activate that data within the tech giants, within DSPs, within other media. And I think that's really interesting because I think we're starting to see this final emergence of a MarTech stack that can be composed however you want it to be composed, that fulfills across all marketing requirements. I think we've got one more question, maybe two. Mitesh, maybe you want to take this. Given your experience, how do brands and agencies differ in how they select technology?
Yeah, definitely makes sense for me to take this one, given my agency background, I suppose. I think I spoke about it a little bit earlier, where if you're a brand or an advertiser, you have a small team that's dedicated to maybe 5 or 10 people that might be dedicated to selecting technology, making sure that you guys have got the right information and technology coursing through the business. And there's nothing wrong with that. Of course, that's a great way to do things. But if you think about the agency space, they will have client teams that look after specific clients, but they'll also have specialists within paid search or specialists within display. And so there'll be an army of people that know that technology really, really well. And it's not as a case of selecting technology independently. I think, most brands do work with agencies when they're buying and selling ad space. For those examples, I would say that it's very much something that should be done together in a combined manner, because there are going to be the specialists, but then there are the brand teams do really great things about being efficient with their budget. So those two elements, best in class technology, but also the cost, are two varying factors that need to be considered. And sometimes an individual team might skim over one of those areas, and so a combined effort is a really good way to do that for if you're a brand or an agency. But for some of the smaller organizations that don't necessarily use agencies to go and buy their media, if they do some of that buying directly, for example, I would say that the way that they select technology is reliant upon their experts and their slightly smaller kind of technology experts. And again, there is a really big shift to having experts in this area. At my time at Wavemaker, or it was called MEC when I first joined it, there were around about 20 people in the data and tech team. And by the time I left 5 years later, there were about 85 people in that tech team. And so the agency itself was recognizing the need for having more and more expertise in that specific sphere of technology selection as well as technology use. And I think that brands are also using or developing their teams in the same way. Some of them are also taking some of those things that agencies used to do in-house because their level of expertise has grown within the team. So there are slight variances in the way that they select technology, but I would encourage anyone in that kind of environment to have to go ahead and select that technology in as much of a collaborative and combined way as possible, because that's the way that you're going to achieve best in class. That would be my point of view.
Great, thanks, Mitesh. And I think Snowflake and Adverity probably come from a similar place, which is that we want the data to just work. We want it to be clean, harmonized, and for data workloads to be easily run on it. And I think your point there about the number of people working on data, we want them to be doing intelligence and data science and running machine learning. And I think you get to a point in the MarTech stack where you want that MarTech stack to be a flywheel of activation and optimization and learning and advancement, don't you? That's the end of our webinar today. I think we've hit the time pretty much on the head. Mitesh, any final thoughts or a farewell?
Thank you for everyone who joined us and listened to us today. As I mentioned, if you take one thing away from this webinar today, it's that please double down on the things that you think are going to differentiate you and innovate. That's the way to thrive in this slightly uncertain market. That would be my takeaway.
Thanks, Mitesh. And I think from our perspective, the modern marketing data stack is evolving rapidly. Please talk to people like Mitesh. Please talk to us at Snowflake. We can advise you on what it looks like. There are resources available on our websites. And ultimately, thank you very much for joining us today. I hope we answered some of your questions and gave you some interesting information in the space. Just a heads up, we will be emailing tomorrow a link to this if you would like to share it. And next week, I'll be hosting a webinar only with myself next week on 2023 trends in advertising, media and entertainment. So please join that next week. Thank you, Mitesh, and thank you everyone for joining.
Thanks, David.